Why did a quiet cowboy keep buying blankets he never used? And what was he really waiting for? Snow exploded beneath the horse's hooves as it charged straight toward Delilah's blanket stall. Someone screamed. Wooden crates toppled across the frozen street. Then a tall cowboy stepped into the animal's path, grabbed the trailing rein, and refused to let go. The wind stung her face. The horse fought. The whole town froze. And when it was over, the cowboy did something even stranger. If you love heartfelt Western stories, come ride with us and share where you're watching from. The last Saturday market of autumn had filled Pine Ridge from one end of Main Street to the other. Wagons stood wheel to wheel, horses stamped beside hitching rails. Smoke drifted from the diner near the corner, carrying the smell of bacon and coffee into the cold morning air. Delilah Brooks arranged her blankets one by one across a wooden display rack. Red-brown, deep blue, cream with narrow stitched borders. Each one had taken days to finish. She smoothed a corner with her fingertips and stepped back. The mountains beyond town were already dusted with early snow. Winter was coming. A loud crack split the morning. People turned. One of the logging wagons near the feed store lurched sideways. A wheel dropped into a rut. The rear axle snapped. The horses panicked. Men shouted. Leather straps snapped tight. Then one gray gelding broke free. The animal bolted straight down the center of the street. Delilah looked up just as the horse came charging toward her stall. For a moment she couldn't move. The blankets, the wooden rack, the pounding hooves. Everything seemed to rush together at once. People scattered toward the boardwalks. Someone yelled her name. The gray horse lowered its head and surged forward. Then another figure stepped into the street. A tall cowboy moved from the crowd without hesitation. He came from the direction of the livery stable, coat flaring behind him. Instead of running away, he stepped directly into the animal's path. The horse lunged. The man caught the trailing rein with one hand. His boots slid through the dirt. The gelding fought him. Its neck twisted. Its front hooves struck the ground hard enough to throw dust into the air. But the cowboy never let go. He spoke quietly. Delilah couldn't hear the words, only the steady tone. Slow, calm, unhurried. Little by little, the horse stopped fighting. The animal's breathing softened. Its head lowered. The street fell silent. A stable boy hurried over and took the rein. The cowboy handed it off as if nothing remarkable had happened. Only then did he turn toward Delilah's stall. "You all right?" he asked. His voice was low and even. Delilah glanced at the blankets. One corner of the display had collapsed, but the rack still stood. "I'm all right." He nodded once. No dramatic speech. No demand for gratitude. His gaze drifted to the blankets spread across the display. He picked up a red-brown one from the front. His thumb pressed lightly against the wool. Good wool. Strong stitching. The sort of blanket meant to last through many winters. "You make these yourself?" "I do." He studied the weave another moment. Then he reached into his coat and laid several coins on the counter. "I'll take this one." Delilah blinked. Most people spent several minutes deciding before buying. This man didn't. He folded the blanket carefully beneath one arm. "Mason Walker," he said, touching the brim of his hat. Then he walked away. By noon, the market had returned to normal. By evening, Delilah had nearly convinced herself the entire thing was behind her. 3 days later, she saw Mason again. He bought another blanket. The next week he bought a third, then a fourth. People began noticing. Even Ruth Palmer raised an eyebrow from behind the counter of her general store. "Walker Creek Ranch must be colder than I thought." Delilah only smiled. But that Saturday afternoon, while delivering thread to Ruth's store, she happened to pass the road leading toward Walker Creek Ranch. There, hanging neatly across the front porch rail of Mason's house, was the very first blanket he had purchased. not folded away, not used in a bunkhouse, displayed where he could see it every day. Delilah stopped walking. The wind stirred the fringe of the blanket. For reasons she couldn't explain, she stood there a moment longer than necessary. Then she turned and headed back toward town. Behind her, the red-brown blanket moved softly in the mountain breeze, and for the first time in many years, Delilah found herself wondering when she might see someone again. The answer came the following Saturday. The morning air carried the smell of wood smoke across Pine Ridge. Frost clung to the edges of wagon wheels parked along Main Street. Delilah had just finished arranging her blankets when a shadow fell across the display. Mason Walker set a tin cup beside her. Steam rose from it. Coffee, fresh and hot. Delilah looked from the cup to him. "You forgot this," he said. She almost smiled. "I don't believe I did." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Not quite serious either. He picked up another blanket and examined the stitching. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Still, when he left, the empty space beside the stall felt larger than before. The next Saturday he brought coffee again, and the Saturday after that. Soon it became part of the morning. The market opened, the wagons arrived, the church bell rang 9 times, and Mason Walker appeared carrying 2 cups. Neither of them ever mentioned the arrangement. The people of Pine Ridge did enough talking for everyone. One afternoon, Ruth Palmer handed Delilah a sack of flour across the counter of her store. "That Walker fellow's been buying a lot of blankets." Delilah folded the receipt and tucked it into her pocket. "So I've noticed." Ruth studied her over the tops of her spectacles. "He wasn't always alone." Delilah looked up. Ruth rarely volunteered information. Years ago, she explained, Mason had been engaged to a schoolteacher from Fort Collins. The woman caught a winter fever. By spring, he was burying wedding plans instead of making them. After that, he threw himself into ranch work, kept mostly to himself, never seemed interested in starting over. The bell above the store door jingled. The conversation ended there. But the story stayed with Delilah. A week later, Mason learned something of her own past. Not from Delilah, from Ruth. A fire. A settlement lost. A young girl left with no family and nowhere to return. He listened quietly while loading supplies onto a wagon. When Ruth finished, he only nodded once. Then he stood for a long moment, staring toward the distant hills. Saturday mornings continued. Coffee, blankets, small conversations, a question about weather, a comment about snow arriving early. Nothing more, nothing less. Until the morning Beatrice Finch stopped in front of Delilah's stall. The banker's wife wore a dark green coat trimmed with fur and the expression of someone performing kindness for an audience. She picked up a blanket, turned it over, then spoke loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Some women certainly know how to improve their circumstances." The street seemed to quiet around them. Delilah kept her hands folded. "I sell blankets, Mrs. Finch." "Of course you do," Beatrice smiled. "And some customers are far more generous than others." A few people looked away. Others pretended not to listen. Delilah felt the heat rise into her face. Then she noticed Mason standing 20 feet away beside the feed store. He had heard every word. For one brief moment she waited for him to say something, anything. But he simply stood there, silent, still, watching. Beatrice eventually walked away. The crowd returned to its business. The noise of the market slowly returned. Delilah folded a blanket that didn't need folding. When Mason approached with the usual cup of coffee, she accepted it without looking at him. The conversation that morning lasted less than 30 seconds, and for the first time since he had stepped into the path of a runaway horse, the distance between them felt wider than the entire street. The weeks that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Winter arrived early in Pine Ridge. The first heavy snow came before Thanksgiving. Frost crept across windows overnight. Wagon tracks froze hard in the roads. The wind coming down from the mountains carried a sharp edge that found every gap in a coat. Delilah kept working. She rose before sunrise, fed the stove, checked the dye pots, sorted wool beneath the lean-to beside her small house. If she stayed busy enough, she didn't have to think about why Mason's silence at the market had stayed with her. Saturday mornings still came. So did Mason. The coffee appeared. The blankets sold. Their conversations remained polite. Short. Careful. Neither seemed willing to cross whatever distance had settled between them. Then the weather changed. Sheriff Caleb Turner rode through town one afternoon warning ranchers to prepare. A storm was moving south through the mountains. A bad one. By sunset, the sky had turned the color of old iron. The first snow began falling before dark. By midnight, the storm was roaring. Wind rattled Delilah's windows. Snow struck the walls hard enough to sound like handfuls of gravel. She sat upright in bed, listening. Then she heard it. A sharp crack outside. Her eyes opened. The wool shed. She pulled on boots and a coat and stepped into the storm. The cold hit immediately. Snow whipped across the yard. The small shed behind the house leaned visibly beneath the growing weight on its roof. Inside were her winter supplies. Raw wool, dyed wool, months of work, months of income. If the roof collapsed, everything would be ruined. Delilah grabbed a shovel and started clearing snow. The wind nearly pushed her sideways. She worked anyway. 10 minutes later, another gust hit. The roof groaned. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. A lantern appeared through the blowing snow. A rider emerged from the darkness. Mason. He swung down before the horse had fully stopped. No explanation, no greeting, just work. He unloaded a bundle of canvas and several long boards from his horse. "You clear the east side," he said. "I'll brace the roof." Delilah nodded. The storm swallowed the rest. For the next 2 hours they worked beneath the lantern light. Snow gathered on their coats. Ice formed along Mason's hat brim. Neither complained. When one board slipped, Delilah caught it. When her lantern nearly blew out, Mason shielded it with both hands until the flame steadied. Little by little, the roof stopped shifting. The shed held. At last, they stepped inside to escape the wind. The small space smelled of wool and cedar. Lantern light flickered across shelves stacked with supplies. Mason leaned a board against the wall. Then his gaze settled on something resting atop a wooden crate. A folded piece of fabric. Small, faded, partially blackened along one edge. He didn't touch it. "That from the fire?" For a moment, Delilah said nothing. The storm howled outside. Inside, only the lantern moved. Finally, she nodded. "My mother knitted it." Her fingers rested lightly on the burned cloth. It was hanging near the door. Mason waited. She appreciated that. No pressure, no questions, just space. The cabin burned fast. Her voice stayed steady. "The only thing I found afterward was this." The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "I carried it everywhere for years." Mason looked at the fabric, then at her. "I'm glad you kept it." That was all. No speech, no pity. For some reason, those 5 words landed harder than anything else. Outside, the storm began to ease. By dawn, the worst had passed. The shed still stood. The wool remained dry. As Mason saddled his horse to leave, Delilah watched him tighten the cinch strap. The sky behind him was pale with morning. For the first time since the market incident, she almost said something, almost asked why he had come. But she already knew. He had seen the storm. He had thought of her, and he had come. That afternoon, while delivering thread to Ruth Palmer's store, Delilah passed the bank and slowed. Across the street stood Amos Finch. Two unfamiliar men were with him. One held rolled maps beneath his arm. The other carried a leather document case. They weren't looking toward town. They were studying the land beyond it. The hills, the creek, the properties north of Pine Ridge. One of those maps pointed directly toward the road leading to Delilah's house. Amos said something. The men nodded. Money changed hands. The transaction lasted only seconds. Then the maps disappeared. The men mounted their horses and rode away. A strange feeling settled in Delilah's stomach. She stood watching until Amos noticed her. His smile appeared instantly. Polite, practiced, too quick. Delilah turned and continued walking. But all the way home she kept thinking about those maps, and about why a banker suddenly seemed interested in the land around her little house. Winter settled deeper over Pine Ridge after that. Snow lingered along fence lines. The creek behind Delilah's property ran slower beneath sheets of ice. The mornings arrived gray and quiet. At first, nothing seemed different. Then, small things began happening. A tax notice appeared in her mailbox. The amount was nearly double what she had paid the previous year. Delilah stood at her kitchen table reading it twice. The figures did not make sense. The next week, another document arrived. This one claimed a boundary discrepancy involving part of her land. She folded the paper carefully and placed it beside the first. By February, there were 3 more. Every one of them carried a different problem. Every one of them required money she did not have. The worry followed her into town, into the market, into her sleep. Ruth Palmer examined one of the notices beneath the lamp in her store. Something smells wrong about this. Delilah nodded. She thought so too. Across town, Amos Finch continued smiling whenever they crossed paths. That bothered her more than the letters. The Saturday market grew quieter around her. Not because fewer customers came, because more people were talking. She could feel it. Conversations stopping when she approached, glances following her. A lowered voice here, a raised eyebrow there. Nothing obvious. Nothing she could confront. Just enough. One cold morning she arrived early and overheard 2 women near the bakery discussing Mason Walker. One mentioned her name. The other laughed softly. Delilah turned away before hearing the rest. That afternoon, she sat alone beside her stove and made a decision. The gossip had started because of her. Or at least that was how it felt. Mason already had enough burdens. A ranch. Employees. A reputation built over years. She would not become another problem. The following Saturday, he arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee. Delilah thanked him, then turned back to her blankets. The conversation lasted less than a minute. The next week she was polite, distant. The week after that, she barely looked up. Mason seemed to understand, or perhaps he simply accepted it. Either way, he stopped trying to linger. Then one Saturday, he did not come at all. Delilah noticed immediately. She told herself she hadn't expected him, yet her eyes kept drifting toward the end of Main Street. The second Saturday passed the same way. No coffee, no cowboy, no quiet questions about weather or wool. Nothing. The absence settled into places she hadn't realized he occupied. Ruth noticed. She said nothing, which somehow made it worse. Near the end of the second week, Sheriff Caleb Turner appeared outside her stall. Snow dusted the shoulders of his coat. "I need you to come with me." Delilah looked up. "Why?" Caleb adjusted his gloves. "Mason asked me to show you something." An hour later, they rode north toward Walker Creek Ranch. The ranch sat beneath the foothills where the pines thickened and the mountains rose beyond them. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The corrals stood quiet beneath fresh snow. Caleb led her toward the main house. The front door opened. Inside was warmth, wood smoke, coffee, silence. Then Delilah stopped walking. The first blanket hung across the back of a rocking chair. The red-brown one. The very first. Her eyes moved farther. Another covered a couch. One rested over a trunk. Two more hung folded on wooden pegs near the staircase. She knew every stitch, every color, every pattern. There were blankets everywhere. Months of work. Every one she had ever sold him. None showed signs of wear. None had been treated as ordinary belongings. They had been cared for, protected, kept. Delilah moved slowly through the room. Her fingertips brushed a familiar border. Then another, and another. Behind her came the sound of boots crossing the floor. Mason stood near the doorway, hat in hand, quiet. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Delilah looked at him. "You didn't need all these?" "No." "Then why buy them?" The answer came without hesitation. "Because buying a blanket gave me a reason to see you." The room seemed very still. Outside, wind moved softly through the pines. Mason glanced toward the nearest blanket. "The first time I came to your stall, you looked like somebody who expected people to leave." His eyes returned to hers. "I figured if I came back enough times, maybe one day you'd stop expecting that." Delilah lowered her gaze. The words settled deeper than she wanted them to. She looked again at the blankets filling the room. Every Saturday, every visit, every cup of coffee. All of it suddenly made sense. And for the first time since this began, she realized she had missed him just as much as he had missed her. The room stayed quiet. A log shifted inside the stove. Outside, wind brushed softly against the windows of the ranch house. Delilah stood among the blankets she had made with her own hands. Months of work, months of Saturdays, months of reasons. She looked at Mason. "You could have just told me." A faint smile touched his face. "I figured buying blankets was safer." That finally made her laugh. Small, brief, real. The sound seemed to ease something in him. For the first time since she had met him, the distance between them disappeared. Not all at once. Just enough. Spring arrived slowly across Pine Ridge. Snow retreated from the hillsides. Mud returned to the roads. The creek behind Delilah's property ran stronger every day. Then the trouble began in earnest. A survey crew arrived one morning, 3 men carrying measuring chains and boundary stakes. They started working near her property line. Delilah rode into town immediately. At the bank, she found Amos Finch waiting behind his polished desk. His smile never reached his eyes. "There appears to be some confusion regarding ownership records." "My records aren't confused. These things happen." His voice remained pleasant. That bothered her more than anger would have. When she left, Sheriff Caleb Turner was standing outside. He had heard enough to know something was wrong. Over the following weeks, he began asking questions, looking through old county records, reviewing land transfers, comparing signatures. The deeper he dug, the quieter he became. Meanwhile, rumors spread faster than ever. Beatrice Finch made sure of that. She spoke at church gatherings, at social dinners, on sidewalks, always politely, always indirectly. But everyone knew who she meant. Delilah ignored it, mostly. Some evenings she sat on her porch after sunset and watched the mountains darken beyond the pines. More often than not, Mason's horse appeared on the road. Sometimes he stayed for supper. Sometimes they simply sat with coffee between them. No grand declarations, no promises. Just 2 people who no longer felt the need to fill every silence. Then came the county spring fair, the largest gathering of the year. Ranchers, merchants, families, traders. Main Street filled from dawn onward. Livestock pens crowded the south field. Children ran between booths. Music drifted from the dance pavilion. Delilah displayed her blankets beneath a striped canvas awning. Shortly before noon, Amos Finch arrived with 2 county clerks. Several folded documents rested beneath his arm. A crowd began gathering. People sensed trouble. Amos cleared his throat. He announced that ownership of Delilah's property was under dispute, that surveys had revealed inconsistencies, that legal possession might soon transfer. The words settled heavily over the square. Delilah stood perfectly still. Then another voice cut through the crowd. "That's enough!" Sheriff Caleb Turner stepped forward. Several papers rested in his hand. Original county filings, signed decades earlier, verified copies, transfer records, tax receipts. Everything Amos had hoped nobody would find. The sheriff spoke calmly, clearly. One document after another. Each one contradicted Amos's claims. Each one revealed alterations made years later. A murmur spread through the crowd. Faces changed. Questions began. For the first time all day, Amos Finch looked uncertain. Beatrice's expression hardened, then vanished entirely. She said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The truth stood in broad daylight. The crowd slowly turned away from the Finches and toward Delilah. Not with pity, not with curiosity, with respect. The matter ended there. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting, just facts finally catching up to a lie. As people drifted back toward the fairgrounds, Mason approached Delilah. Something rested beneath his arm. A folded blanket. The newest one. The one she had never finished selling. He placed it carefully in her hands. She unfolded it. Inside, stitched neatly into one corner, was a small piece of cloth. 2 names. Delilah Brooks. Mason Walker. She stared at them. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Mason looked toward the distant mountains. "My house has been quiet for a long time." His voice remained steady. "I got used to it." He paused. "Then I met someone who made it feel too quiet." Delilah lowered her eyes to the blanket. Around them, the sounds of the fair continued. Wagons, laughter, music, life. "If you'd like," Mason said softly. "I'd rather not spend the rest of it alone." The world seemed to narrow to that single moment. The blanket, the spring sunlight, the man standing in front of her, the man who had stepped into the path of a runaway horse, the man who had shown up during a blizzard, the man who had filled a house with blankets simply because he wanted reasons to come back. Delilah reached for his hand. "Neither would I." Relief crossed his face so quickly she almost missed it. But she saw it, and she smiled. The wedding took place in early summer. Simple, honest. Friends gathered beneath clear Colorado skies. Ruth Palmer cried openly and denied it afterward. Sheriff Caleb stood beside Mason. The mountains watched from a distance. Life moved forward. Delilah continued weaving. Walker Creek Ranch added a small room beside the main house where her blankets were displayed. Visitors stopped to admire them. Many purchased them. One shelf held something different, a burned piece of knitted cloth. Beside it rested the blanket from their wedding day. Past and future, sharing the same space. Months later, a wagon rolled away from Pine Ridge beneath the warmth of early summer. Grass swayed across open fields. Wildflowers dotted the hillsides. A newly finished blanket rested on the seat between them. Mason held the reins. Delilah leaned gently against his shoulder. The town grew smaller behind them. The road stretched ahead, and for the first time in 10 years, home was no longer a place she had lost. It was waiting for her. As the wagon rolled down that dusty Colorado road, with the mountains fading into the evening light and the summer wind moving gently through the grass, it wasn't really the end of Delilah's story. It was the end of her waiting. For years, she had carried her life the way she carried those blankets, carefully stitched together, one day at a time, holding on to what remained after loss had taken so much. She never stopped moving forward, even when there was no promise that anyone would walk beside her. And maybe that's the part that stays with us. Because if you place yourself where Delilah once stood, alone in a quiet house holding memories that no one else could see, you begin to understand that healing rarely arrives all at once. Sometimes it comes in small things, a cup of coffee left beside you, a hand that shows up during a storm, someone who keeps coming back when they have every reason not to. The truth is, some of the strongest kinds of love don't rescue us. They simply stay. Long enough for us to believe we don't have to carry everything by ourselves anymore. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment that meant the most to you? And if you'd like to spend more evenings beside campfires, dusty roads, and stories about second chances, loyalty, healing, and unexpected love, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next horizon.